Stop the FOMO. Do you ever fear missing out on getting the very best TV money can buy? You have $3,000 in your pocket and you're ready to pull the trigger, but there are still four TVs to choose from. The LG G4, the Samsung S95D, the Sony Bravia 9, and the Sony A95L, which was this year's King of TVs 2 years running. Today, I'll help you decide which one is best for you. Because I've had all four TVs since their launch, I reviewed them, had them side by side, compared to each other, compared to my Sony reference monitor, the 3110. I've also seen them side by side at events like M-Wave and the King of TVs Shootout in all types of content, SDR, HDR, sports, calibrated, uncalibrated. And now I'm ready to give you my assessment of which TV is the best in 2024. With my surprise decision at the end, it's not what you think. Today's video is brought to you by WhoKeys. Trying to build a PC on a budget but don't know where to buy your Windows software cheaply? WhoKeys to the rescue. Use my coupon code SF20 and immediate discount with a free upgrade to Windows 11. At the bottom of this order where it says code CARD, to the right is the product key you need to activate Windows. So copy this long number, then go to the Windows menu and click on Settings. In the Settings menu at the bottom, select Update and Security. Select Activation, then select Change Product Key, paste what you copied from WhoKeys, click Next, click Activate, and you're done. You can buy Windows 11 Pro or Office 2019 Pro with my discount code SF20. Yes, I've been using WhoKeys for the last several years on my own PC builds, and it just works. Now, before you all go crazy in the comment section because you bought the wrong TV, stop. These TVs are indeed the best. They still are all flagship TVs. You did not make a mistake. As you can see here, 85% of the content you will ever watch, whether streaming, sports, old TV shows, movies, or YouTube, they all look amazingly the same. It is only that last 15% in certain scenes, certain content, where they are a little bit different, each TV prioritizing something else over the other. And so to help you navigate these differences, I've created this chart. Yes, there are numbers. This is a relative ranking system from 1 to 5, comparing them to each other, with 5 being the best of the group, and 1 meaning it scores worse than even mid-tier TVs. A rarity indeed. Of course, these rankings are subjective, reflecting my preferences, and will likely differ from other TV reviewers. So I will share with you how I assess each category, prioritizing certain content and settings over others. And if you share what I like and dislike, then this is definitely the video for you. At the end of this video, I'll share with you which of these TVs I would keep for myself if I was to choose only one. Now let's dive in. So on this chart, you can see I have the 4 TVs listed from left to right: Sony A95L, Samsung S95D, the LG G4, and the Sony Bravia 9. All these TVs at the 65-inch size are around $3,000, possibly a little bit more, maybe a little bit less depending on when you buy it. But ultimately, these 4 TVs represent the best money can buy in 2024. And below them, I've listed their panel technologies. Sony A95L is QD OLED, Samsung S95D, similar technology, QD OLED, the LG G4 is WOLED, and the Bravia 9 is a mini LED LCD TV. Now, on the very top, as we said, this is all 5s. They are all equally awesome and indistinguishable 85% of the time. And this is critical. It's not like if you buy one TV and then you have another one next to it, oh my gosh, I got the wrong TV. This looks different. No, 85% of the time, they're like, oh wait, is that an OLED or is that a mini LED? They are all that good. Now, below this 85% use case is where we start seeing differences. So when I say 85% of the time, whether it's sports, HDR content, YouTube watching, streaming, movies, old TV shows, very, very similar. And this includes upscaling, right? And as we go down each of these categories, I'll explain how I approach each of these categories, which may be different from other reviewers, and it may not share what you think these categories should be. So obviously, minds may differ, and it's okay. But what's important is I'm sharing with you what I think after seeing these TVs side by side for oh so many months. So 85% of the time, they're all 5s. 5 meaning they are the best in their class, which is literally the best TVs money can buy. Let's talk about the last 15%. We'll begin with accuracy. Now, this is one where we'll define it as what the king of TVs brought to the table. Specifically, accuracy as defined by comparing these TVs to the very reference monitor that Hollywood is using. In this case, it is the Sony BVM HX3110. I have this monitor, it's fully calibrated, and this is the monitor that movies, studios use to calibrate their content. And so the question is, once these TVs are all perfectly calibrated to an inch of their life, how close do they get to the reference monitor? And as the shootout shown, the Sony A95L won again. It was the closest to the Sony 3110. However, the Samsung S95D was oh so close, in some categories even beating the Sony. So between the 5 and the 4.5, I would say these two are neck and neck. But again, reminder, you have to have calibrated these TVs to see those subtle differences, right? Uncalibrated, what happens was that the LG slightly beat the Samsung. That was the preferred TV when it's uncalibrated, with the Samsung coming behind the LG. So ultimately, if you don't calibrate your TVs other than the Sony, the Samsung and the LG really are neck and neck, and thus their score is slightly behind the Sony, with the Bravia 9 behind all the OLED TVs. Because at the end of the day, infinite contrast makes a difference in those most difficult scenes when the lights are turned off. And that's the last equation. When you compare accuracy, the lights have to be off. Completely dark room. And that's where OLED really shine. Infinite contrast really comes into play in a completely dark room. You see all the subtle shadow details. And with the Bravia 9, because it's mini LED, those shadow details doesn't have that infinite contrast, those subtleties that the OLED will have. Now, in a brighter room, that's not as important. You'll still see the differences, but it's not as obvious. So in the case of accuracy, if that is your most important criteria and you don't plan to calibrate the TVs, really, all three of the OLED TVs are awesome. With the Bravia 9, definitely a step behind, and the Sony definitely a step slightly ahead of both the LG and the Samsung. If you do plan to calibrate it, I think you'll have a winner with either the A95L or the Samsung. But let's say accuracy isn't your thing. You know what's my thing? The next one. It's HDR Impact. And for me, this is what it means, right? This is what HDR Impact is. Wow. Whether it's Mad Max, right? We always talk about Mad Max Fury Road. Those explosions, bam, boom, bomb, right? These kind of scenes where the bright lights really get you. HDR Impact is all about that brightness going from dark to bright, that flash that hits you in the face. In this case, there's always a trade-off. That extra brightness, but you lose a little bit of color for that pop, or you want all the color, but that bright luminance isn't quite there because you're trying to get all the color. This is where I differ from others. Some people want all the color, but then that means HDR Impact isn't as powerful as it could be. They're more towards the accuracy side. Again, there's no wrong answer here. I prefer impact to be impactful. As much as I like accuracy, and I do, I don't want green skin when it's supposed to be tone yellow amber, but the reality is I want impact, and I'm willing to go up a little bit of color for that, just a little bit. And this is where, for me, the G4 and the Bravia 9 hits you hard. The Bravia 9 still has some of that color, but it loses a little bit of contrast. The G4 loses a little bit of color, but still has the contrast. Both of them get super bright, closer to 4000 nit if it requires it. They don't get fully to 4000, but they get closer than the A95L or the S95D. However, those two TVs give you a little bit more color at a slightly lower brightness. There is no right answer here, but for my preference, we're talking about hairs, splitting hairs. I prefer the pop of the G4 and its infinite contrast, whereas the Bravia 9 will give you that pop, but a little bit more color, just losing a touch of contrast, which I'll tell you right now is not noticeable in a brighter room. In a dark room, the G4 really wins it for me. In a brighter room, it may be the Bravia 9. Now these are bright, flashy scenes. Darker scenes, there's no HDR Impact. That's closer to accuracy. So ask yourself, how much of the content you watch is HDR Impact, boom, bomb, flash, and how much of it subtle skin tones with the bright flickering light in the background, right? These very moody scenes like The Greatest Showman. There's some flash, but there's a lot of deep color, and more color at all luminance levels may be for you, and that would be the QD OLED, either the A95L or the S95D. But if you prioritize that flash bang, like I do, then the G4, the Bravia 9 could be for you. So just keep that in mind. Very subtle differences, but it's there and it's for you to choose which one fits your viewing condition as well as your preferences. Next up is streaming. We'll start with internal, right? Because most people turn on their TV, they do not buy an external Apple TV or a Roku stick or Fire Stick or Google Chromecast, whatever. They just use the internal apps. So for internal streaming, and I've compared all these TVs side by side, similar content, Netflix, Disney Plus, and the like. And you know what? They all do a phenomenal job. I could not find one being, oh, obviously better. Now, in subtle things like sports, one might get a little bit brighter than the other. So I separated sports from just normal streaming of TV shows and Netflix, HDR, 4K, 1080p, just whatever, right? I found them to be all excellent, with the Bravia 9 just falling slightly short because it's not an OLED TV with infinite contrast, because in a brighter room, it looks pretty good, but in a darker room, some of that lack of contrast is exposed. So if you watch in a light-controlled room, I recommend you choose any of these three OLED TVs. In a brighter room, the Bravia 9 is fine. And also keep in mind, now that we're talking about the two different types of technology, off angle. If you're in front of the Bravia 9, solid. If you move a little bit too much off angle, right, the TV's to the side, it's going to lose some of that contrast, some of that color. Definitely get an OLED. So depending on your viewing condition, right in front of the TV, Bravia 9 is fine. But if you're in the kitchen, you're watching off to the side, get one of the three OLEDs instead. Now, if you're streaming through an HDMI port, like using an Apple TV, like we did at the shootout, well, in that case, the Sony A95L or the Samsung did a better job than the LG. But now, if you're streaming with an external device, like the Apple TV that we did at the shootout, clearly both the Sony and the Samsung did a better job. The LG, it showed some of that macro block, and there were some issues that reared its ugly head a bit on the G4. It was subtle. You had to kind of stop and see it, but it was there. And of course, the Bravia 9 is slightly behind the G4 simply because it's not an OLED TV. In darker scenes, the Bravia 9 showed its weaknesses there. Now, moving on to sports watching in a bright room, right? In a dark room, they're actually all very similar. In a bright room is where one separates from the other. This is why, with a lot of ambient light noise, right? Bright room, brightness everywhere, windows everywhere, you need your TV to get a little bit brighter. For example, watching hockey, to preserve that brightness in a bright room. The TVs that do this best really are the Samsung, the LG, and the Bravia 9, with the Bravia 9 doing it slightly better because it's mini LED. It can push full screen brightness harder than the OLED TVs. The G4, I think, comes in second. It doesn't dim at all in its max brightness. You lose a little color, but the contrast is there. It's easy to read the scores and everything. Then comes the S95D, and the Sony A95L would be the dimmest of the four in a bright room. Now, in a dark room, obviously you would be on its brightest setting. It wouldn't be in vivid or in sports mode. Standard mode among all the TVs is pretty bright, but the Sony A95L, even in standard mode, is slightly less bright than the S95D and the G4 and the Bravia 9. And next up is gaming on a console, not PC gaming. That is its own beast. We're not going to review that because that's so sensitive to so many little things. 144 hertz, right? FreeSync, is it working? How does it look? What's the latency like? We're talking general console gaming, whether it's Switch, Xbox, PS5. How's the image quality overall? And ultimately, all the OLEDs are awesome with very subtle differences, right? So I would say the G4 this year, slightly better than the S95D because you're able to control some of the accuracy, some of those settings. You know HGIG is exactly what you need. It's labeled, it's there, it's easy to find. The Samsung S95D, slightly behind in its settings. You'll have to do a little research to get there. It's not as easy to get it to exactly the image quality you need or want. The Sony is close, not quite the gaming OLED of the other two TVs, but the image quality I think is definitely good enough for a flagship TV, and the Bravia 9 simply is not an OLED TV. Mini LEDs just cannot compete with OLED when it comes to that contrast and the high performance, low latency. It's just LCDs cannot keep up with OLED. But for a mini LED, that 3, it's awesome. It's just not quite OLED level. good enough for most people, but that's the subtle differences, right? And lastly is TV audio. And this one is highlighted because it's not important. Wait, what's the opposite of highlight? Maybe I should have low lighted it, right? But it's really not as important as the image quality because most of you buying a flagship TV probably will have either a flagship sound system or a flagship soundbar. I highly recommend the Sony Quad. I love that. Or bang for the buck, the Samsung Q990C or 990D. Both of these top of their class for value and performance. But if you don't want any of that, you just want a really good TV audio, the best in this group is definitely the Bravia 9. Then comes the G4, then the A95L, and the S95D is a one because most TVs a tier below perform even better than the S95D. The TV audio really is not loud enough. There's just, it's so empty. Like it's just not there. Very disappointing. I mean, if the G4 and the A95L could do it for this price, Samsung really needs to lift its game. Now, on to the conclusions. We're going to paint with a general brush for each of these TVs to give you an idea of which TV best represents which use case. Sony, accuracy, calibrated or not, it is the accuracy king, pun intended, and I love its color and motion settings, right? Both of these lets you tweak it to your heart's desire. Easily one of the best out there for those sort of things. Now the S95D, I call it the jack of all trades. It does everything really well. Not necessarily the best, but so close to the best that it might as well be the best. This is the TV for most people. Now the only caveat is the AR coating, the anti-glare coating. In a dim, light-controlled room, it's not an issue. It's amazing. In a brighter room, be careful. Some reflections just don't look good on this TV because it spreads it, makes it even worse, losing contrast and kind of pushing color in weird spaces. So if you have like an orange LED in the back, it's going to show on your TV and it's going to screw up the color just a bit. So keep that in mind, right? If you have light-controlled room, the Samsung S95D performs as well as the A95L more often than not. But in a brighter room with maybe weird windows in the back reflecting off this AR coating, bring it home, check it out and see if it bothers you. And as far as the settings, I like the S95D because it's simple, right? You get to what you want, a couple of clicks, and you have the settings you need. Not a lot of tweaking, so those of you who want to tweak to your heart's content, S95D doesn't have it, but this is the TV I get from my parents. Well, they have a Samsung. They actually love the Samsung remote. It's easy to use. The settings are easy to find. I like it personally, the settings and the UI. It's very intuitive for me. So for me, the simple settings is actually a plus. We get to the G4. This is HDR Impact, sports. Those things, if that's your priority, I think the G4 nails it. 5-year panel warranty is unique in the industry. If you have any worries about burn-in in the first 5 years, LG will replace that panel on the G4 if that's an issue. Although it doesn't include labor, still saving money on that actual panel replacement, and then granular settings. It has the most detailed settings like A through Z of any of these TVs. WebOS is all about getting your TV to the right setting, whether you're a calibrator or whether you're just playing with the simple settings. Motion, color, the settings are just, there's just a lot of it, right? But LG fans love WebOS. It's fine. Granular settings, it's a strength, I think, for the G4. I personally love the G4 for that. Now, the Bravia 9, HDR Impact and sports like the G4, but in a brighter setting even. So if you are in a medium lit room, G4 is probably the better TV overall, just because I love infinite contrast. But if your room is even brighter, or you feel the G4 maybe isn't bright enough, get the Bravia 9. It does raise that level of brightness just a bit. More importantly, if burn-in is a concern, you don't care about the warranty, you just don't want to ever deal with burn-in. Mini-LED LCD TV, burn-in, not a risk with normal content. The other 3 TVs, all OLEDs, there's always that risk there. I can never say you'll never get burn-in, but with the Bravia 9, it is even less likely you'll ever get burn-in. And of course, in the brightest rooms, the Bravia 9 looks phenomenal, and the power of infinite contrast is less obvious in these brighter rooms. They're more obvious in the light-controlled room. So light-controlled room, go OLED. Super bright room, definitely consider the Bravia 9, and its TV audio is top-notch. But you're looking, wait a minute, it's only a 4. If it's the best of the group, which in this group it is the best, shouldn't it be a 5? Well, That takes me to the last question. Which TV would I choose as the best TV for me in 2024? A few days ago, I would actually have made a decision. But something has changed, and now there is a fifth contender. Oh, yes, tomorrow. Check out our fifth contender. Right now, it's a mystery TV, but I will announce what this TV is. It is a flagship level. It is as expensive as these four TVs, and it is worth considering. So I cannot give you a decision which of these four I would choose until I tell you how awesome. Until next time, see you on the live stream.
Hit it! That's what I'm talking about. Wait!
Okay, now, from the beginning.
Hit it, boys.